want to say aloha to this special edition of the TRF newsletter. I'm here in Hawaii, in Hilo, Hawaii, with Lorraine Freedle. She's going to be presenting at the Trauma Conference in May, and I just wanted you to have a chance to see her incredible studio where she works and to learn a little bit about Sandplay. We have this incredible array behind us, and maybe not everyone who's coming to the conference has heard about Sandplay therapy or knows what it is at all. So we have before us a Sandplay and all the figurines, and I would love for you to explain something about where it comes from and how you got into it.
Yeah, so in Sandplay we use sand, and we use images in the form of miniatures, and we offer water, candles, fire, and so you're actually using the natural element, which is touching the earth itself. So it's kind of a privilege to be able to do this work because you're touching the earth right away, and so it connects us to our bodies. And Sandplay originated in Switzerland by Dora Kalff, who is a Swiss analyst, and she was good friends with Carl Jung, and this is where the families knew each other, and this is where she was working with children, and he asked her to go study with Margaret Lowenfeld in England, where Margaret Lowenfeld was using sand in miniatures with children, and she added the Jungian component. And so her method involves playing with the sand, images, it's Buddhism roots in terms of meditation and play, and it's non-directive and non-interfering. I think that's a big defining piece of Sandplay, is that the therapist holds this space, but it becomes a place where somebody can tell their story.
Wow. And we did a little sand train last night, and it has a very dreamlike quality. So is that a connection also with the Jungian therapy, is the dreamlike?
Well, yeah, so you get to enter this space and bring forth whatever the unconscious wants to come forward, right? So you're looking at these images, and we always say, just whatever calls you, let it come into the tray. And so people will suddenly look at something that maybe it doesn't like, ooh, that's kind of odd. Or maybe they'll look at something that they just can't stop looking at, and it'll trigger a memory or something in their lives. And so the tray starts to make itself. And the connection is that whatever's inside can be seen and worked with. And so it's very confrontive, because sometimes what's hidden deep in the recesses of our being shows up, and then we have to see it and deal with it and integrate it. Yeah, so it's very powerful. But it's not talking, and so we don't have to use words, which is a big part of Sandplay, is that we just let our brains are image-making organs, and so we just use images and let things come forward, and then sit with it. Yeah.
So it's like a lucid dream that you can see when you're awake.
Yeah, exactly. A waking dream, and it's alive. It correlates well with Jung's active imagination, so you can just be alive and with your imagination. So some people come to do Sandplay to become more creative, to get in touch with their creative self, to open up energy for healing and change, as well as healing deep wounds and childhood.
And so you're coming to the Trauma Conference with Sandplay, and you also teach a presentation for the certificate program. So I'm wondering, what's the connection between the Sandplay work and trauma healing?
Wow. Well, Sandplay is a very natural modality for people who've been traumatized, who've experienced trauma, because it doesn't rely on words. And many times people don't know. It's trapped in the body. They don't have access except through, sudden memories or flashbacks or sensations. And so in Sandplay, they can create little by little what's going on, not realizing what's happening, but just letting things come forward in a way that's safe, that nobody's telling them what to do. And so I say, make whatever you like. Often the trauma story comes out, but it comes out in pieces, and then they put the pieces together over time. And so in Sandplay, you're not just connecting to your own story. You begin to connect to the story of your people, and stories of your culture and your land. Intergenerational things come out, all from the unconscious. It's quite magical and intense. It can be very intense.
So I know from psychodrama, when we often start with what the story that we consider the thing that happened or the fact. And imagination comes into play when we imagine what could be the possible thing that we would change that could heal what happened. And does a similar thing happen in the Sandplay? I mean, do people have the agency to change things when they're...
Yeah, so when you're creating a Sandplay scene, there's the initial hook, something grabs us. And so we don't usually start with an intention, although some people do on their way to session. They'll be thinking, oh, I'm going to make this or I'm going to make that. But when they get here, whatever needs to be made comes forward, right? So we might think with our head one thing, but then our heart or our body will pull us in a different direction. And then we sit with what we made. And so as you're using all of your senses and all parts of the brain and connection, then you start to reorganize. You put this here and you realize, oh, that doesn't go there. This needs to be closer here. And so they reorganize. They're actively working on reorganizing inside through the work that they see. Yeah.
So please tell us a little bit about the workshop that you're going to be doing.
Yeah, so I'll be doing a workshop called Stories in the Sand, and we'll be looking at psychocultural factors to healing when communities are in crisis. And I'll be pulling on the work we did in 2018 when Kilauea erupted, and so many people were displaced without a home. And we brought Sandplay, mobile Sandplay, to the shelter. And also the work of people since the pandemic that have been coming and doing Sandplay and connecting to themselves and to this place. We live in Hawaii, and so many of the stories will be related to the Hawaiian culture. Yeah, so psychocultural factors that I'll be highlighting have to do with this organic nature that we have, that we want to become in balance, and we're organically designed to become in balance. But because of trauma, we might disrupt that, or we might not have access to those energies that can come in harmony and wholeness. And so in Sandplay with trauma, we tap into the natural capacities to bring balance. So I'll be present relationally, very important, just like an attachment relationship. In Sandplay, I'm aware of my body, what's happening, what I'm picking up from the other person, so that I can support them in going places that it might be a risk or a challenge for them. And then little by little, they put the story together and it comes into balance. So just like a hero's journey, no matter who you are, there's stories of us having to leave what's familiar, go someplace that's not familiar, that's scary, make a change. Sometimes there's a huge death that happens. We've had those experiences if we've lived long enough in our own lives where we think everything's perfect and going just right, and then everything, in Hawaiian we say huli, that everything is upside down and we're on our knees. And so in Sandplay we can go to those places and become whole again. And you see a pattern over a series of trays where people can little by little join the opposites, parts of themselves that they haven't claimed. So unrealized potential is there. So many times when people do Sandplay, they will go to a place where, oh my gosh, I haven't thought I could do this. I could be a dancer. I don't have to be this. Wow. I can do this thing that I've been denying myself. Yeah.
Wow. Makes me want to do another tray.
Yeah, there you go, anytime.
Yeah.
So the neuropsych piece, I can tell you a little story about that.
Yeah, just tell us, what is neuropsych even?
And so neuropsychology, the way I define it, is the relationship between our brain and our being and how they work in concert together.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah. So the physical organ and the spiritual psychological being working together. And we see that unfold. And so when we work in the sand, we activate the senses. And I did some research with folks with traumatic brain injury. And they taught me this process that we term the neurosensory feedback loop. So they would touch the sand.
Is that okay?
And yes, and then something would get activated, sometimes crying, disturbing sensations in their gut,
Mm-hmm.
an idea, and then they would go to the shelves and get something. And so it was through the senses that we learned that they would get in touch with themselves.
Right.
But verbally, they were spinning, they were being perseverative, they would have the same conversations, and they couldn't penetrate to their being. But when given the opportunity to touch, to see, to go to preserve brain functioning, the deeper self, they could access who they wanted to be.
Wow.
And so it was quite beautiful. And over again, this happens where we touch the sand, we see the images, we get in touch with emotion, and then thought. It's bottom up, and the thoughts, new ideas, and over, with a therapist there, of course.
Yeah. Just to be the container for what's happening and the witness for what's happening.
No, we cannot develop, we develop in the context of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so often people say, oh, well, can't I just get a sandbox and go home and do some meditation, right?
Yeah.
But it's contained in a relationship. I mean, the brain develops in relationship. We develop as humans in relationship.
It was very powerful to have you here when we were doing our sand trays. I could feel your emotional resonance with each thing that I selected. That was really wonderful.
Yeah, and it was touching for me, and to go through those just undulations and feel it.
And the process of going to the shelves and just seeing everything, it's like a listening experience where you're listening to yourself while you're seeing something. So there's a relation with your environment at the same time that you're listening to yourself very closely to. I was listening to my internal responses to all this beautiful stimuli. It's really incredible.
Yeah, that tuning into yourself and then picking something, and then maybe it fits, maybe it doesn't, but when it fits, you know it.
Yeah. And I was really coming with, what do I want to give myself? What do I want to bring into my life? Or what's the energy? And I imagine anybody who comes here has a different question that they're asking when they stand in front of this. Yeah.
The symbols themselves are alive. They can mean so many things. And so we may put it in and have an association with it, but then when it sits in relation to something else, or if it's underneath the sand versus on top of it or on the edge, there's all these relationships that happen and the emotions that come with it.
I wanted to break some rules last night, and I didn't know if they were rules or not. One was that I thought, oh, what if I don't like something, can I put it back? And then I had so many things inside the box, and I thought, am I allowed to put anything outside the box?
Yes, I should have shared. We say the only rules, I put the choice away when we're done. That you leave with that image up that you made. This is the soul right here, and so we want you to leave with that intact. And then afterward, if you don't mind, I spent time with it and just being still and honoring it, just feeling very grateful for the experience, very moved personally. There were several points that just, And then as a Sandplay therapist, we're in touch with impermanence, because then there's this amazing moment, we honor it, it was very intense, and then we put it away. And then I smooth the sand, and it's gone. And it's this over and over again, this experience that this moves. It's a moving and changing constantly, the psyche.
What strikes me about this incredible collection is how some things may be meaningful to me or appeal to me and be comforting, and other things are sort of horrifying. And I imagine when you're traumatized, you arrange your life about not feeling stuff. So you'll go for the safe things and have little lamps and little things. But then you have a nice little symbol like this, which is a very common symbol. I imagine most traumatized people wouldn't choose that. because it evokes so many feelings. And so I wonder how people actually go there to evoke a stimulus or here's another
Yeah,
stimulus.
so
like,
this
I
particular
saw.
image is,
Huh?
as a mother,
yeah,
it's extremely evocative. I
Uh-huh.
remember
Yeah.
seeing this, and I actually
Yeah.
saw it with my son
uh-huh.
and got very emotional.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so something like this may or may not appear early in a process. So sometimes somebody who's been traumatized, they cannot help, like these things come in anyway, despite themselves.
uh-huh.
In fact, Eric Erikson I like to think of him as doing the first research in Sandplay.
Mm.
And what he did was he did this dramatic productions test. Okay, this was I think 1938 or something.
Yeah.
And he asked college students just to make a dramatic scene with miniatures, put them on a table. They could not create a scene that did not reflect their own repressed memories.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And so he said they couldn't override what was coming forward
Right.
with whatever the directions were.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens is we have one thought, but then we get taken by this. We get carried by the
Yeah,
process.
so even when you think you can avoid it, it keeps coming up anyway. But to my mind, still the main issue with trauma is avoidance and getting triggered. And so people don't want to get triggered. Like, I doubt whether many traumatized people would choose that particular
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
picture very quickly.
Yes.
That's sort of scary as hell. And I wonder at what point the person would dare to choose a thing like that. Like, that takes a great deal of courage to really go with all the things that a picture like that would evoke in people.
Unless that is how you see yourself.
Maybe it's how you see yourself. Yeah.
If that's how you see yourself, it might be a harder thing to give yourself something that's.
But you see, as a therapist, you may think you're not directive, but you're always sort of pushing people into the edge. Like, let's go a little bit deeper into that. What brings that up? Huh? But in Sandplay, it sounds like you have much more freedom to turn a blind eye to things.
For example,
Yeah.
if somebody were to bring that up early
Yeah.
with trauma, and maybe it was something that was disturbing, in other cultures this is an empowering piece for some women, and so it can evoke different emotions, they may not say a thing about it. They may put it in a corner, they may bury it, they may surround it by skeletons or flowers. But we don't say, oh, you must tell me about it.
The moment you put that next to it, everything becomes more benign, doesn't it?
So something shifts, yeah.
I discovered that last night.
It's interesting that you chose
Yeah.
these two things, Vessel.
Yes, the palm trees were very important, huh? At the
Yeah.
end.
Well, they really are neutralize a lot of stuff. Huh? So a few trees, a little nature sort of really makes things much.
And this point is very important, and we can watch the psyche in motion. And this is another thing that we get to see. The conflict and defenses come and go.
Yeah.
So somebody picks this or they don't, like you said.
Yeah.
I may
Right.
say, I write down, if they pick something up and they put it back on the shelf, I take note. Because
Right.
it may be months before that comes in.
Like I would not choose that.
Yeah,
I deliberately chose to put it that way. That's an example of something I wouldn't choose.
too much.
It has so many associations. For you, interestingly positive. For me, all negative.
And this is the uniqueness of a symbol. You know, we cannot make assumptions.
No.
We cannot say, oh, that's wonderful. Oh, that's so nice what you did. We don't make any judgments because it's their symbol. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, but I'm curious. Well, let's look at a few more things.
Oh, this one. Oh.
The grief one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I chose this one last night.
Not knowing.
On the side of evil. Even though the woman is clearly in great grief. And then later on you told me the story. Maybe you have to tell that story because it's...
So this image was made by an artist, Diane Byers, and when we went through a very difficult loss when we lived in New Mexico, the story is La Llorona, and she is an individual. She grew up, wanting a vaquero, a fancy, cowboy singing to her, a handsome man. But then when she got what she wanted, all looks, then he went out on her and drank and went out with other women. And eventually he came to her one day to see the children with another woman. And she lost it. She lost it. And she ended up throwing her own children in the river. And as the story goes, they drown in the river and she wanders crying, mi hijos, just crying out for her children. What have I done?
Yeah.
And it's inconsolable grief. It's like sometimes it's so hard. It's not something we can just say, take a warm bath. And that's what she represents to me, that sometimes there's no answer. So when she went in there, I could feel this was a moment of,
So it's interesting, I chose that last night, and I put her very much in the dangerous corner. That maybe it suggested some openness on my part to possibly confront something like that at some point.
I think in your work and our work, we confront this kind of pain all the time.
And it comes up sometimes by complete surprise.
Yes.
People don't come intentionally, like the real emotion surges. I call them implicit surges. Like you're just moving along and then you get overtaken,
Yeah, what really struck me last night is that I put things there that somehow appealed to me, and then the meaning slowly started to evolve as time went on, and it came out of nowhere, or it came not out of my little left brain.
Yeah, you kept saying, this is so right brain, you said.
And it is.
It is. And I'm looking at a picture like this. It is objectively very sweet. I think for many people this would be a terrifying picture.
Can I see it?
So it's a child in the symbol of like a hand of God, perhaps.
But it's objectively as comforting as you can hope for. And for some people, it may mean making yourself vulnerable, or not being able to trust when somebody is nice to you, or it can evoke so many things. And so I was really struck that objectively that's a very positive image, but my reaction was not entirely positive to it. And then indeed when you do Sandplay, you build up these things that come out of seemingly nowhere, and because that's what trauma is, it comes out of seemingly nowhere, that you have this intense reaction to something. People go like, what's wrong with you?
Where did that come from?
Why do you get all freaked out by that?
And so these images have a positive and negative charge and everything in between. And so, when you shared that, the beauty of it is they get to express it, whatever it is. It gets to be seen.
And it
witnessed.
doesn't have to be limited.
Right.
Yeah.
It's no longer repressed, it's no longer ruling, it's out there now, and they don't have to say anything about it. And maybe in time, the relationship shifts. Other images may join with it, but we leave.
Yeah, and the joining makes a difference. Like I had another. Like if you join that with that, it changes. And my suspicion about that decreases.
And what's beautiful, each of these images, the miniatures have a story of their own, right? So I have a relationship. So the therapist's psyche is all over this place. So I have a relationship to the image before.
With everything.
Sure.
And so...
there's an encyclopedia behind
Yeah, and then all of the ways they've been used, they gain these stories. And this is what I'll be talking about at the conference, the idea of these stories, in stories, in stories. And so we can benefit from all of the stories that an image may hold from all time. Not just our personal story, but the image can take us back. Oh, bamboo. Oh.
And
See this picture, for example, that I have all negative associations to. It gets more benign when I see this.
Put a little bamboo in there.
bamboo seems to be, maybe we should do more bamboo in therapy. Like,
Well, something organic,
right.
just something alive,
Yeah.
something that's growing.
Have you ever had somebody be afraid of the tableau that they made?
Well, some are afraid to touch the sand
Ah,
because of the charge, right? So we think of, the sensory, it's, we play with sand when we're children, if we've been traumatized young. When I lived in New Mexico, I learned that the men in Iraq, for example, called it the sandbox. And so it was a charge for them to get into the sand after coming back. And so in time, it's always by invitation. So if you'd like to make it, you can. If not, we wait and they sit and they watch. And the act of going in is part of the evolution or not.
yeah.
But most people that come for this purpose. So they do get into the sand and we watch the sand itself change over time. Yeah.
But I'm just saying maybe have a strong emotional response to what they see that they've put together.
Oh my God. People think it's so soft. Oh, you're just putting some things in the tray. And then you look at it.
Yeah.
And my first ever sand play that I made, I did it in a training. And I thought, the instructor was like, oh, we have this sand here. And everybody just brought miniatures from their house. I mean, this was not a, full on collection. This was just examples. And I couldn't stop playing with the sand. And so she said, I need a volunteer. And I'll do it. Well, what I put in there changed everything. Like I saw things I couldn't see, but then I couldn't deny them because they were right there and I made them.
Right.
And so many therapies, the therapists make suggestions and so it doesn't come purely. I couldn't blame the therapist, right? I did this, right?
Oh, you couldn't.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That happens too. Yes, of course.
So I wondered how often people actually just lose it and may wipe things out.
It's very emotional. We've had kids that, you have to be, imagine having somebody who needs to clear a shelf or dump, like they make this and then they have to pour water and dump. And so they do what they need to do. And so we have to be ready.
Yeah, I imagine that a lot of intense somatic responses might come up.
Yeah.
And people freezing maybe sometimes.
Yeah, and we see symbols of dissociation. So we'll see things way up on the surface. We'll see ladders, we'll see balloons, we'll see helicopters, all of these ways of I can get out of here if I need to. Right?
Oh, very useful. Huh? It's good to get a little helicopter in there.
Yeah. And so we like that. We let that helicopter be, because that's their safety. But you see these images of the dissociative defenses,
Interesting. And it reminds me so much of psychodrama in that you see a map of your interior in the sand. With Peso, when there weren't enough people to enact, he would use furniture and items in the space that they're in. And I've worked with people in person to help them to create a psychodrama in a space. And this reminds me of that.
Yeah.
I have another question. I was so intrigued that you teach in Moscow and in Korea, and you're right in the shadow of the Kilauea volcano, which erupts from time to time here. And I've been certainly impressed with how much of us is determined by culture. For example, I'm a Dutchman by origin, and you would have a very different attitude towards this as your average Dutch foreign person than if you grow up in Rome, let's say. And so I wonder how much, well, it's really different. How is it different to deal with people in Moscow and people in Korea? And because what's so intriguing in our field is that in some ways, trauma is trauma, whether you work with Aboriginals in Australia or wherever. But there's also great difference in cultural expression, cultural digestion. I wonder if you could say something about it.
Yeah, so it's an honor to see, so therapists bring their work and we have groups. So usually it's a group of maybe 5 or 6 therapists and the therapist brings their work. And so in the work, first of all, sometimes it's very difficult to tell the culture of the person by the work, right? So
Really?
a child is a child. So on one level, it's fascinating to see the universality of the human spirit. That's amazing. And with that said, there's things that are very personal and very unique to that culture. And so I ask for stories. Oh, tell me about this character. Sandplay is always in the context of the person's situation and their culture. And so, the fairy tales that come alive. This morning, we were talking about the Nutcracker and the Rat King in the Nutcracker and different
We were talking about
associations.
Nutcracker too. In our hotel, we saw beautiful hula dances being danced. And Licia said, "This is so much better than Nutcracker."
Don't tell the Russian friends, I won't tell. Yeah. And so there are stories we share. And this is what's so beautiful because, sometimes the owl in one culture is an omen. And another culture, it's something that brings good fortune and wisdom. And so we learn the stories. But with Sandplay, you're also going to the deepest layer of the psyche, which is the archetypes. And so we pull these energies that Jung calls like psychic instincts. So they're already there. And so as we go from personal to cultural, all the way to archetypal, we're the same. We're the same. And we may have things that, because of your experience, that get pulled out into your life or yours. But we go into these archetypes and bring out new energy. So it's like a fishing trip, I like to think of it. I fish and I pull something out like, oh, do you want to throw it back? You cannot.
But so we did Sandplay last night, and we're fairly mature and not too disorganized people. So we got a fairly organized Sandplay. But if you're traumatized, you're scared of everything. You always feel threatened. So how do you deal with it at the beginning to get people to even be devoted to creating something if you are really primarily interested in defending yourself?
And so these defenses are very alive. I feel them, I tune in, and I just stay with. So sometimes it's so sparse. It's just one little thing here and one little thing there, and you feel this emptiness and this hesitancy. And then next time a little more and a little more.
And people themselves may see, boy, my life is empty.
And so they're confronted, and I'm there for them. And it's safe. That's the main thing. Whatever comes up is safe. But yes, it's the defenses are there, and we don't try to bring the defenses down. We let them, because the defense comes and then the palm tree comes afterwards. See?
Thank God for the palm trees.
And then they like I did that.
Yeah.
I was feeling this way and I put the palm tree in. So nobody does it for them. So they get that agency.
Right.
Yeah. I love this palm tree.
I was gonna have a conversation in the sand with Bessel's things, but then I put this one little thing here and I think, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe I should have just let it be all you.
No,